Hi, I'm Melissa Case from hattohem, and today I'm stepping out of my comfort zone. The majority of my sewing is, well, costumes. I very rarely make something that's modern or for everyday use. However, I am at that special time in my life that demands new clothes. And due to the ongoing pandemic, clothes shopping has become a bit of a chore for the vertically challenged. Typically, I need to try something on before I can buy it, but that's not really an option right now. So, out of necessity, I've decided to sew myself a dress that I can wear for my virtual baby shower in March. Due to my schedule, I only really allowed myself 2 days to make this dress, which normally would have been plenty of time until I started to ask myself how I was going to make this dress. Since the two possible fabrics I had were both knits, my first choice would have been to use my serger. But I knew I would be filming this and posting it, and I thought that if somebody was trying to sew along with me, they might not have a serger. But then I thought, what if people wanted to see what it was like to sew a dress with a serger? Which one do I do? Yes, I was really this indecisive. And that is how my 1 2-day project became 2 1-day projects. So, in this video, I'm going to show you 2 different ways to make a dress made out of knit fabric. But first, I want to take a moment to tell you about today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Louisa Jewelry. I was very excited when they contacted me because I am a huge fan of their dedication to sustainability. They use recycled materials whenever possible, even with their shipping materials. Their 14-karat solid gold jewelry is made from recycled gold. Their sterling silver jewelry is made from recycled silver, and the plating that they do uses eco brass. They also offset 100% of their carbon emissions. With the baby on the way, taking care of the environment is more important to me than ever. If you go on their website, they're very transparent about their process and what makes their company tick and what their mission is. And it was just really refreshing to be able to have that level of transparency in any industry, really. Their pieces are also beautiful. I received the Sam necklace and a gel bracelet, as well as the rope mini adjustable ring. Now that I'm in my 3rd trimester, I noticed my wedding ring is getting a bit tight, so I'm glad I'll have a stand-in ring for the day my wedding band no longer fits. I love when jewelry comes in a set, so I'm thrilled that all 3 pieces go so well together. I can see myself wearing this set often. I shot this video across 3 days, and I love how this set looked with all 4 outfits. I chose pieces that are on the dainty side, but they have a range of styles available, so I'm sure you'll be able to find something that suits your taste. Their pieces can also be worn alone or layered for a striking effect. You can build so many unique combinations just using their pieces or with things that are already in your jewelry collection. I know what you're thinking. Jewelry can be really expensive, and typically that can be the case, but not with Louisa. Because they sell directly to the consumer, there are no luxury markups. Their pieces start at $39, with my necklace and my bracelet each being $59 and my ring being $39. However, if you use my exclusive discount code, hattohem10, you'll get 10% off your purchase. On top of that, their Valentine's Day sale is currently taking place. That means right now, everything on their website is 15% off. Now, the last day to guarantee delivery before Valentine's Day was 2 days ago, but that doesn't mean you can't still take advantage of this sale. I wouldn't wait too long though. Due to their dedication to sustainability, they only produce their pieces in small batches, so they do tend to sell out quickly. You can check out their designs at analouisa.com/hattohem or by clicking on the link down in my description. Right now, the link in my description is for their Valentine's Day sale, which again is their entire website, but I will update it once the sale is over to make sure everything is current. So 15% off now and 10% off later if you use my discount code hattohem10. Now let's get sewing. The dress pattern I chose was Simplicity 1360. I decided to make a dress with sleeves since the remainder of my pregnancy is mostly in the winter months. I'm also making the mini dress version because, as I stated before, I am short, and their normal length dress was a little closer to my ankles than I like for day to day. I'm assuming I was supposed to use my pre-pregnancy waist measurement because my current waist measurement didn't quite line up or appear on the pattern at all. Now, I really hate using tissue paper patterns. They just tear so easily. So my first step with any new project is to transfer the pattern to sturdier paper. Now I know this seems like a waste of paper, but I do usually end up reusing these patterns later down the road. And whenever I don't use, I do end up reusing to cut out smaller pattern pieces or take down notes on something. So I am getting more than one use out of this paper. An extra plus to doing this is the fact that I get to keep the original pattern intact if I ever need a different size. Whenever I cut an original pattern, I always end up needing it in a different size later on. One thing to remember is to transfer over all your pattern markings, all the triangles, circles, and grain lines. I also label my pieces with the pattern company and number. Then I put the pattern piece number, what piece it is, how many to cut, and the size. I did make one alteration to the pattern that was for the sleeve pieces. I wanted 3/4 sleeves, but the only options were long or short. I followed the pattern to the length I wanted, taped it, and redrew the lines for the seams, either cutting off the excess or filling in gaps with scraps of paper. With that done, I can finally get to work. Step 1 was to cut out the pattern. I cut it out using a rotary blade, which is much faster than using scissors. Knowing I wanted to make 2 dresses from this pattern, I cut the pattern from both fabrics, one after the other. Once the pattern was cut out, I went around each piece and snipped into the notches. For this project, I broke out my trick machine, the Brother CS6000i, since my primary sewing machine only sews a straight stitch, which isn't great for knits when you're using normal thread. There are a few things to help when you're sewing with knits. I switched my standard needle to a ballpoint needle. The rounded point pushes the fibers to the side more easily. You also want to be mindful of what stitch you use. 2 of the best stitches for sewing with knits are the stretch stitch, which is number 3 on my machine, and the zigzag stitch, which is number 4. If you're sewing along with this project, be sure to experiment with both stitches to see what's best for you. But before I can worry about that, I had some gathering stitches to sew. Using pins, I marked the dots at the top of my front pieces on the fabric. I lengthened my straight stitch and sewed 2 lines of gathering stitches between the pins. I won't be gathering these until the dress is almost complete, but doing this now really helped me keep track of what piece of fabric I was dealing with, because this pattern gets a little complicated. I switched over to the stretch stitch and I set the stitch length to 4 and the stitch width to 2.5. The center front was then stitched up to the lower dot on the pattern, which, again, was marked on my fabric with a pin. This next step confused me a little bit when I was reading the pattern, so I want to make sure I show you exactly what I did. This involves the little L-shaped section on the front pieces. I found my gathering stitches from earlier, so I knew I was in the right place. After, again, marking dots with pins, I folded the L on top of itself. The piece with the gathering stitches should now be lined up with what will be the side seam. My notches matched up perfectly, which was a pretty big relief. I clipped the fabric together from the edge to the pin, then stitched that seam closed to the pin. This left a small opening at the end of the seam. Next, I took the bodice pattern piece and I marked my dots. I decided to color code the dots so I knew which spot I was looking at for the next step. I marked the inside dots with green pins and the outside dots with white pins. I also put yellow pins in the shoulders, which came in handy because things get a little convoluted in the next few steps. The right side of the bodice is pulled back to front through the left opening of the front piece. It's then pulled front to back through the right opening. The trick here is to make sure all of the front piece fabric is between the green pins on the front bodice. At this point, the dress was looking like a confused mess, but that's okay. I found the white pin on the left half of the bodice and clipped it to the left half front piece, right sides together, stopping at the green pin. I knew I had the correct piece for the front because it had the gathering stitches on the side. I then repeated the clipping process on the right side of the dress and then stitched up the seams. The dress was then taken over to my ironing board. I pressed the new horizontal sleeves flat, then towards each other. Pulling out my bodice pattern piece again, I marked the remaining dots with pins. The 2 halves of the bodice are then folded, right sides together, before I stitch between the 2 dots. Now the neckline of the dress won't be quite so plunging. Back at the ironing board, I used my pattern piece as a guide so I knew how far in to press the neckline seam. I'm not sewing it down yet though. The front of the dress is done, so it's time to move on to the back. Luckily, step 1 was nice and easy. Just sew up the center back. This is one of the best things about sewing with knits. No zippers. The back-facing piece was folded in half and sewn along the top of the back's neckline. It was then understitched down. After a quick break to rewind my bobbin, the facing was turned to the inside of the dress before being stitched down one more time. The shoulder seams were next. The front bodice and back shoulder seams were clipped together with the bit I pressed before hanging over the neckline. The overhanging fabric was folded over so the right side of the fabric was against the wrong side of the back strap. After I stitched the shoulder seam, I stitched a bit of grouse grain ribbon over it to stabilize the seam so it doesn't get stretched out. I turned the neckline facing back in place, and just like that, the neckline was done. It was finally time to stitch up the side seams. I clipped from the hem up to the seam near the waist, and then from the armhole down to the other seam near the waist. Now I could finally use the gathering stitches I sewed back in step 1. The side seam stitch ended up being between my 2 rows of gathering stitches, so I pulled out the line of stitches that would be seen. Now for my least favorite part of any project. The sleeves. Actually, these weren't that bad. They got a row of gathering stitches between the notches, were stitched up the side, and then set into the arm side pretty easily. And now for a special hem for the dress and the sleeves. With knits, you can do a zigzag stitch and call it a day. I decided to dig out the twin sewing machine needles that I never use. This is sewn with a simple straight stitch, but it has some stretch to it. The downside to using this is that sometimes stitches get skipped if you sew too quickly, like I clearly did. The tension can also be a bit tricky, but if someone is close enough to my hem to see it, then they're not social distancing enough and I have bigger problems. And that's it for sewing a knit dress on a conventional sewing machine. Now how different is it with a serger? Surprisingly, not that different. Before I put my sewing machine away, I ran the gathering stitches I knew I would need on the front pieces and around the sleeve heads. Then it was time to switch my sewing machine out for my serger. I use a Brother 1034D. I sewed all my seams with a 3-thread overlock. I threaded the left needle for a wider overlock stitch. The only reason I used that one is because I'm reorganizing my sewing room and couldn't find my Allen wrench. Am I proud of that? No, but I like to be honest in my videos. I stitched with a 5/8 seam allowance, which means a lot of fabric was sheared off with a knife as I sewed. Limited room for error here. Because of the deep seam allowance, I snipped 5/8 of an inch into my fabric whenever I needed to start in the middle of a piece. Once again, I marked all of my pattern dots with color-coded pins, and once again, it helped keep me sane. From this point on, the dress was assembled in the same way as the other, just using the serger for assembly instead of a sewing machine. The next difference came when it was time to work on the hems. I opted to make a rolled hem where the stitches are so close together that it looks like a satin embroidery stitch. It was a slow process and it's a little wavy, but I like the little trim of white around my hem and sleeves. So, 2 dresses in 2 days. Now you may be thinking, but how do they compare? Well, let's take a look. The dress sewn by machine left a little bit of room for error because it left the seam allowance at its full length. There were some tension issues with my hems, but I don't mind too much. The biggest pro was that this method doesn't require any additional machines. As long as you can do a zigzag stitch, you can use this method. The biggest con was that it didn't look quite as clean on the inside. The dress sewn with the serger left very little room for error because it cuts the excess seam allowance right off. It took some experimenting to get the tension of the threads right, but once they were good for the entire project. The biggest pro to this method was that it provides a very professional looking finish. The biggest con was that you may still need a regular sewing machine. I used mine for the gathering as well as reinforcing the top of the neckline because it wasn't laying properly without the seam allowance. And that's it. Let me know in the comments which dress you like better. If you like this video, don't forget to comment and give me that little thumbs up. Also, be sure to check out the Aunt Louisa link down in my description. You get 15% off while their Valentine's Day sale is going on, and afterwards, you can get 10% off when you use my discount code hattohem10. You know, just in case something catches your fancy. Well, that's all I got. I'll see you next time. Bye!